김게르마라고 합니다. 가자크민대학 교수고 카자흐스탄 고린이 3세입니다. 전공은 세계사와 독일어 했고 박사학위는 한인 이민사대에서 논문 썼어요. 그 책이 한인 이민사가 3권짜리인데 한국에서 한국말로 책이 이미 나왔습니다. 그 한인 이민사를 연구를 시작하기 전에 이 구소련 고려인이라고 하는데 고려 사람하고 그 고려 사람 역사를 많이 공부하고 있습니다. 계속 공부하고 있습니다. 이번에 여기 방문하는 목적은 두 가지입니다. 하나는 그저께 여기 UBC에서 국민적 포럼 참석한 후에 이제 오늘 여기 세미나에서 고려인대에서 발표를 하게 됐습니다. 근데 목표 생기 전에는 이유가 있어요. 이유는 또 두 가지죠. 하나는 여기 UBC 대학에서 스티븐 교수가 아주 친한 친구입니다. 학자고 우리가 서로 안 지가 25년 됐습니다. 스티븐은 또 우리 고려 사람 방언, 고려 말하는 방언 사투리를 많이 연구하는 분이고, 두 번째 이유는 여기 이미 방크에서 또 다른 캐나다 대도시에서도 이 고리인들이 이민자들이 거주하니까 그분들이 10년, 15년 부스런 지역에서 가나다로 이민해가지고 거기에서 지금 살고 있는데 우리 지금 고려 사람 현재 상황대에서 많이 모르니까요. 그분들이 아마 관심을 보여줬죠. 올해 한 번에는 여기서 세미나를 했다고 고려 사람들에서 세미나를 했다고 들었어요. 그때는 이 다큐멘터리 영화를 보여줬다고 해요. 고려 사람라는 다큐멘터리 영화. 그때도 많은 사람들이 모여가지고 관심을 보여줬다고 해요. 그러니까 오늘도 이런 기회를 여기서 준비를 해가지고 제가 마지막 발표를 할 겁니다.
그러면은 한 가지 여쭤보세요. 이 고려 분들이 여기 밴쿠버에 거주하고 있는 남한에서 온 그 한인 공동체와의 교류를 원하시는지 안 하시는지?
그러니까 우리가 고려 사람하고 그 다음에 이 교민들이 말이에요. 요즘 100년, 10년, 20년 한국에서 이민하는 분들과 이미 차이가 많이 생겼어요. 왜? 우리는 이민 인사가 150년 됐어요. 150년. 그러니까 150년하고 한 130년까지는 고려 사람들하고 남한이랑 아무 관계가 없었어요. 왜 소련하고 대한민국이랑 외교 관계가 없었기 때문에. 근데 소련 시대 때 그 고려 사람하고 북한이랑 아무 관계가 없었어요. 물론 전북끼리서는 거리가 있었지만, 근데 고려 사람들이 이북으로 가볼 수가 없었어요. 이북 사람들은 또 소련으로 안 가고.
소련과 이북은 같은 공산주의권인데도. 근데
공산주의권이기도 알죠. 이북은 아주 특징 있는 나라이죠. 사회주의 공산주의 나라 중에서는 예를 들면 그 돈독가라고 하면 비교도 안 돼요. 돈독하고 옛날에 있었던 돈독하고 그다음 이북하고 차이가 무척 커요. 무척 커요. 그러니까 폴란드, 체코 다 공산주의 나라라고 하지만 그 각각 나라에서 차이도 있고, 근데 이북은 완전히 차이가 커요. 그러니까 두 번째 이유는 왜 교민 사회하고 그다음에 고려 사람 사회하고 별로 친한 관계가 없는 거는 교민들이 이민해가지고 목적은 돈을 벌어요. 비즈니스예요. 우리는 그 나라에서 살아요. 그러니까 우리 목적은 그 나라에서 공부도 하고 일도 하고 사회 활동도 하고 다 하는데, 근데 이제 3세부터는 한국말을 못해요. 전에도 2세도 못해요. 1세는 한국말 알고 사투리를 했어요. 아주 드물은 환경북도 육진 집안 방언. 그러니까 만약에 지금 80세라고 하는 고린이 그분이 조금 사투리를 해요. 그 사투리를 하면은 한국 사람이 못 알아들어요. 제주도 사람 말하면 서울 사람 못 알아듣죠. 똑같아요. 근데 우리가 150년 떨어져 사니까. 그러니까 이 커뮤니케이션이 안 돼요. 교민들하고, 그 다음에 우리는 디아스포라하고 이민자 사회가 아주 틀려요. 그러니까, 근데 이제는 20년 지나고, 이제는 우리가 남한으로 자유롭게 할 수 있고, 자 세대는 또 한국말을 배우기 표준 한국말을 배우기 시작했으니까 거리가 점점 지금 넓혀지고 있습니다. 여기는 또 제가 알거든요. 미국에서 말이에요. 미국에서 하와이 이민자들하고 그 다음에 그 미국을 이민하는 한국과 별로 거리가 없죠. 예, 차이가 많이 생겼으니까. 그러니까 문제는 점점 아마 그래도 캐나다에 가서 영어 통화되니까 그러면 우리인들 여기 캐나다 2세, 3세 교민들 2, 3세가 할인을 해주고 만나면 영어로 다 통해요.
그러면 영어는 다 쓸 수 있나요?
어디?
그러니까
여기?
그러니까 언어가 고도인들의 지금 그러면
어디?
언어는 주로
카자흐스탄이요?
아니면 여기에 와요?
여긴 연세 오신 분들은 아마 영어 부족하죠. 젊은 사람들은 좀 배워줘요. 그러면 여기 사람이니까 여기 잠깐 왔어요. 그러니까 어느 정도 이 젊은 코리인들이 이제 영어로 하는 것도 잘.
그럼 그 카자흐스탄은
카자흐스탄 자기 고국어 있어요. 카자흐말이 있고, 근데 아직도 코리인들은 30세대 때 러시아말을 썼기 때문에 모국은 아직도 러시아말을 해요. 모든 코리인들이 모국은 러시아말이에요.
교수님은 그러면?
러시아 말이죠. 한국말은 내가 얼마 전까지는 한마디도 못했어요. 네.
그래도 지금 잘 하시는데요? 다 이해하시고?
그 교수니까요. 네, 또.
I will be talking about language and will tell you a few things about it, but I'm not going to do a linguistics talk because this is neither the time nor the place for it. But the idea of a language that failed comes from a paper by a scholar called Austin writing about Soviet Karelian and linguistic construction. Karelian is a version of Finnish spoken on the Soviet side of the Finnish-Soviet border. And the idea was that for Korean theater, where they were doing a new play about the 1937 deportation, where they were all put on trains and shipped to Central Asia, and it was called Tritsitsit Moi Transit, a sort of really radical, you could never have done this during the Soviet Union. Very exciting. I'm sitting in the audience, the curtain goes up, the lights go on, and suddenly everybody in the audience is full of Koryo Saram. Put on earphones to listen to the play, which is being performed in Korean, to listen to the translation, because they don't speak Korean anymore, which is sort of one of the legacies of 1937. Essentially, I'll stop by saying that the fact that the languages were able to split in this way, or to begin to split in this way, was actually a result, in a way, of Japanese colonialism, which helped push the Koreans up into Korea anyway, and because of the Japanese, there was no standard language which allowed for this divergence. And the fact that now, today, many Soviet Koreans, many Koryo Saram do not speak Koryo Mal anymore, is probably, we must say, is a consequence of Soviet policy to a large extent. I'll stop there. Thank you very much. I apologize for going over slightly. So, do we want to do Q&A for 5 minutes? We have time?
Let's do 5 minutes Q&A, and then we'll do the last
Yes.
one.
So just quick. So just for if anybody has a burning question, we have 5 minutes for Q&A, and then we can do more Q&A. The self-designation Koryo Saram shows up in the very earliest Russian sources from the 1860s already, and so we have to assume that the Koreans in the very far northeast of Korea used that traditionally as a self-designation. And of course, Koryo is one of the names of one of the ancient kingdoms before Chosun. The other thing is that the other word you find a lot in the sources, in the early Russian sources from the 1860s, 70s, 90s, is some of the Russian sources called the Koreans Gaoli, which of course is the Mandarin Chinese pronunciation of Koryo. So that the Chinese in that region also called the Koreans Koryo. So it seems to be a very old ethnonym in that part of Korea. Scott?
Is that a result of sort of like just being so far in the provinces, the Chosun identity to push that far up?
It's entirely possible. This part of Korea, the very far northeast of Korea, was always a backwater. Sort of politically, it was not well connected to the political center. I mean, all of North Korea was in some ways discriminated against during Chosun, and there's lots of research about how Pyongyang and Pyeongan province, the northwest, were discriminated against. But interestingly, no one even talks about Hamgyong really when talking about the Chosun dynasty. It was just considered to be kind of the boondocks, really far away, really hard to get to, all mountains. And so on. So quite possible. But I would leave that kind of research to Don Baker, who knows more about it. We'll go for the little boy. Did you have a question? No. Oh, I thought you were going to ask a question. Okay, go ahead.
So what was the official rationale in 1937 for moving Koreans out of that region?
The official rationale was for state security reasons, and it was feared that there were pro-Japanese spies hiding amongst the Koreans in the Russian Far East. Was the official reason, and Gilman Kim has written a really excellent paper showing, though, how proposals to deport the Koreans had been floating around for many years before that. Okay, well, let's stop there and come back at the end, because I want to give Elena her time at the mic, and I'll introduce Elena Yugai to you. Elena Yugai is just still finishing her master's degree in history at UBC, and is an historian of the Koryo Saram, and has done already some very interesting. Well, she's done some field work in both Uzbekistan. As Uzbekistan and the village of Blagoslavyenne, among other places, but also Russia, doing interesting research, and would hope she'll do a PhD someday soon on the history of childhood amongst the Koreans in the former Soviet Union. And I believe she is 4th generation or so.
4th, yeah.
Yes, and so please welcome Elena Yugai.
I'm a cultural historian, so what I want to look at is actually children's history. And the reason why I chose the history of childhood is because it is one of the largest and most silent groups. But children, like their adults, have also been subject to really enormous and very violent social and cultural transformations throughout the entire Soviet Union. In fact, the government wanted to assert its rule and wanted to sort of use education of the young kids as a primary means of controlling the population, because it's much easier to sort of raise the citizens who want to control rather than sort of try to convert the adults who already come with their own notions. So, after the 1917 October Revolution,
could anyone go to school out of those kids? That the government was promoting education and going to school. So if a kid wanted to go to school,
no, not at the beginning. There were still two types of schools: like schools that were subsidized by the government, and then schools that sort of the community had to support. So depending on where the school was actually located, there were still a lot of obstacles. You know, just the way the schools were run. Sometimes there was never enough teachers. So compared to Russian schools, Korean teachers have to handle a lot more students. And another problem was they have to, just because the child wants to go to school doesn't mean that the parents are going to let him or her. Yeah, it was much more common for boys to be involved than girls.
In the back, Rita.
Thank you. So as a result of that whole reform, what was the percentage of kids who actually received an education?
By early 1930s, 85% of the kids were enrolled in school. I think that's 33,000 students.
And prior to that, in the 1920s?
Prior to that, I think Gilman College was better, maybe in single digits.
Scott?
Yeah, I noticed on your slide, the one you were talking about education around 1917, there was three types. You had the Hanmun, I assume that's probably like Solwon or the traditional village schools where they had, the village teacher doing Confucian canon in a Hanmun curriculum. And then you said there were missionary schools and then some like Japanese style schools.
And traditional Hanmun.
Two questions. First, were there other, besides those Russian Orthodox missionaries, were there other sort of, North American or European missionaries, either Protestant or Catholic up there as well? And then secondly, with what you noted as Hanmun, again, I probably saw one, because I know there were up there this time, into the early colonial period in Korea, there were people leaving to go up and still doing Solwon and things. But how long did
Hanmun last?
Well, how long did those traditional schools last? Did they last up to deportation? Did they extend past deportation? I know there was some, I remember seeing something maybe thinking about some Hanmun being taught after deportation, but I'm wondering if it existed in those schools. If those traditional schools survived either up to deportation, you said 1917 was there, but up to deportation and beyond, the Solwon.
Okay, so to answer your first question, yes, there were other missionaries working in the Russian Far East, and they were opening schools not just for kids but for adults as well. Actually, there's a collection of missionary archive here in Canada, the Protestant
in Nova Scotia.
Where you have to look at it. But
Canadians were in that region.
I know that Gail went up. He didn't go up to. He went up to Manchuria or something, didn't he?
Yeah, just briefly. Okay.
And as far as Hanmun schools, actually, I don't know. They were forbidden for the most part in 1920s. But I read a novel about Vladislav Vindman, and I think there's like a short episode that said that around 1930s they were still trying to teach Hanmun to the kids. Yeah.
Well, part of the problem might be that there was a huge confusion in the popular mind about the difference between Chinese characters and Hanmun, meaning classical Chinese, just as there is today with most Koreans. And you will have noticed in some of my slides that the textbooks they were using in schools used Chinese characters. And there was a popular perception that it was impossible to write Korean without using Chinese characters, and therefore it is not yet a good time to convert to a Latinized script. So you could say that Chinese characters saved Hangul in the Russian Far East, which is a really interesting way to look at it. So there might be that confusion as well. I'd be very surprised if there were traditional Hanmun, Seowon type classical Chinese schools operating beyond 1922 or so. I'd be really surprised.
I just was showing.
Blagoslовен is a bit of an exception.
What happened in 1922?
So Blagoslовен, by the way, was this really bizarre, really interesting, very early village, far up on the Amur River, away from the main settlements, founded in 1871, and there were clashes between there was a Japanese-oriented school in the village, and then there was another traditional school, and the Russians were concerned about it, so there's articles about it from that time.
Did you get a chance to look at who wrote those books and made those pictures? Or who were they just copies of other, some parts perhaps, copies of other Soviet books translated to Korean, or who composed the text and made the pictures?
There was a very active intelligentsia movement among Soviet Koreans, and there was a very vocal section of Korean intellectuals and creators who were trying to propagate Korean language. So these were written by Soviet Koreans in the 1950s, but they had to go through 1920s. Sorry.
Okay, so this is done in Vladivostok?
Vladivostok, Khabarovsk, Moscow, Russian parts. Illustrations, I don't know actually who's done the illustrations. They're also there.
The books usually say, they list the authors, some of whom are known. Of course, many of the intelligentsia, most of the intelligentsia were arrested just shortly before the deportation, and many did not come back. But they probably even tell you who the illustrator is on these textbooks. Yeah. But as far as we know, these weren't just copied or translated, and they don't read like translations because it's got all this dialect in it.
We do know a lot about the authors.
Yeah.
Okay. So we were honored to talk to Kim.
Okay, I'll introduce German Kim, and we'll come back to more questions and answers later. But it's a great pleasure for me to welcome my good friend and co-author and colleague, German Nikolaevich Kim. We met first in 1989 in Almaty when I was doing my research for my PhD at Harvard, and when he was finishing writing his dissertation in Kazakhstan on the history of the Koryo Saram in Kazakhstan. And since then, he has written, I just can't tell you how many books and articles he has written. But to give you an idea, first of all, you'll see in a moment, despite his youthful good looks, he will be turning 60 this summer. It will be his panga this summer. And to honor his 60th birthday, there's going to be a big, fat book, sort of izbraniya работы, just selected works of German Kim, which numbers, I think, 962 pages of just articles. And then, of course, there are the books. Too many to mention, but for example, I believe you have written a book, maybe even 2 volumes of a book, on the history of education. Among one volume, I'm sorry. But in addition to the Koreans in the Soviet Union, he has also written more broadly about the history of Korean migration, history of Koreans leaving Korea to go everywhere. So he's quite an authority on the Korean diaspora, not just in the Soviet Union, but everywhere. But particularly the Koryo Saram, he is himself a Koryo Saram with. And you're a 4th generation, no, 3rd, right? So his relatives, his ancestors, must go back to the 1870s or so in the Russian Far East. And he could talk to us at length on any number of topics. But I believe he's going to talk to us now about something a bit more here and now and contemporary as to what's happening with the Koryo Saram in the post-Soviet space today. Is that correct? More or less.
Okay.
But I mean, So whatever you want to speak about, we're very pleased to have you. Please welcome Gavin.
Visit of Vancouver and UBC. Exactly 15 years ago, I came first time to a conference, UBC. This time also, a day ago, was finished a big global Korean forum. And to have 1 day rest, I am together with you. The formal reason of my visits are these conferences, but the crucial reason is my friend Ross King. Because without him, I will be not here first and second time. Yeah. And of course, I'm very grateful to his wife, Yoshim. We know each other also almost 25 years here. And I visited Ross and Hussein in London. We met in Seoul many times, and also in my country, Kazakhstan. I'm so thankful for hospitality and caring about me all these days. Thank you, Hussein. So, and a couple of days ago when we discussed with Yelena, and I also would like to thank her because all seminar she prepared and we exchanged emails. The idea was that the audience of the seminar would know not much about the history of Koryo Saram, and but Ross mentioned also, and Elena mentioned also the main stages of the history of Koryo Saram. So, when I prepared my presentation today, so I thought that there will be 4 parts of my presentation, and the first part will be outlines of the Koryo Saram history. So, and the second part is new challenges and the diasporic strategies of Koryo Saram in Central Asia. Fourth, the Russian government to celebrate this anniversary, nationwide. But this time, 150 years anniversary, we decided to celebrate it together, because in this 150 years, 130 years is our common history. Just after the disintegration or collapse of Soviet Union, we have separate history, but still we have connection, relation, and ties each other, even we are living in different independent countries. And then the date 60s. Why I have fixed the 60s? Because Ross mentioned it. We know the first official record about the crossing of the 13th Korean families, the border, imaginary border. Yeah. Okay, it was fixed already. But the Koreans, especially South Korean scholars, they say, they write that many Koreans, they moved to Russia and moved back to Korea earlier, in 50s, 40s, even in 18th century. Soviet period is very exactly 17th and 37. It means period in the Far East. Then deportation is it's very separate in history, stage in the history, from 37 until 41. So, because the deportation was continuing, not only just in 1 year. The last deportees were deported from south provinces of Russia to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Soviet period in Central Asia from 41 and 91, and then post-Soviet period. Concerning groups, and in this period was established and educated the Korean intelligentsia. And Koreans in Soviet Far East preserved their own identity, culture, and tradition. Koreans in the Central Asia, that's also a stereotype that Koreans appeared in Central Asia just after the deportation. If you look at the census of Russian Empire, 1897, we can see that the census fixed already Koreans in Turkestan Krai, and in recent Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. And Soviet government wanted to develop the rice fields in Far East, also in Central Asia. And so 1999, the first Korean colhose, Kazris or Kazakh rice, of this fast urbanization periods in Kazakhstan. In Uzbekistan was the other story. In Uzbekistan, until 80s, still existed Korean colhose around Tashkent, very famous, like Politatil, Polarная Звезда, Dimitrov, and so on. You know, the history of Koryo Saram without Kobunji, it will be, say, you know, will be not full because Kobunji is known by all Koreans in the Soviet period. And many Soviet Koreans, Koryo Saram, they did this Kobunji. And I have studied this topic and published a small book about Kobunji as a kind of ethnic entrepreneurship of Koryo Saram. Even in Soviet period, it was possible to do this ethnic entrepreneurship. And yeah, okay, let's keep new challenges. New challenges. You know, after the collapse of Soviet Union, all these Central Asian republics in Russia, they were very similar. Of course, they were like specific peculiarities, and but in the whole, this was Soviet Union and Soviet system. And all these 70 years in Soviet Union was raised a new type of people, Homo Sovietic, as we call it. Yeah? And after the collapse, the Central Asian countries, there are 5, the government and the leaders of these countries, they made different choice of development of the countries. And so this now is, after 20 years, is a big difference of political regime in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, or Kazakhstan. Or this different economic system. In Kazakhstan we have actually capitalism. Yeah? And the living standard is also very different. For example, the GDP per capita, the difference is 10 times or more between these republics. The language situation is also different, but all what is common for all these countries, that these countries began to ethnicize the state, this nationalizing countries, because in all these countries the native population, like Kazakh or Uzbek, they become the title of titular population. So Kazakh or Uzbek or Kyrgyz language became the status of official language. And yeah, just on the language policy in Kazakhstan was also not stable. First, the Kazakh and Russian language became the status of state languages, two state languages. And then the Kazakh population was against this law. And then the law was changed that on the Kazakh language becomes the status of the state. And then many Russians left the country. And now we have the third law, and it's fixed also in the constitution of the Kazakhstan. The official state language is Kazakh, but the language of common use is Russian. Yes. They migrated to Russian south, Volgograd, Saratov, Oblast, where there's very good conditions for agriculture. Might be a couple of thousand. Much more Koreans, they left Uzbekistan. Because in Uzbekistan was some different situation. In Tajikistan, it's another story because there were 11,000 Koreans living in Soviet Tajikistan. But when in Tajikistan began the civil war, then Koreans began like war refugees. So they left the country, all. Not all, okay. I don't know exactly how many, but the president of Korean Association in Tajikistan told me that there are maybe 400 Koreans still, but only in Dushanbe, in the capital, because capital is more or less safe and is controlled by government. 2/3 in Russian, 1/3 in Korean. Then in Russia is Российский Korean, is followed in Russian. Yeah. Korean radio and TV. We have in Kazakhstan TV program. It's just 20 minutes a week, and it is in Russian or in Kazakh. In radio broadcast, we have also program 20 minutes, but it's repeated 3 times, the same program. Schools, we don't have ethnic schools, but in this kolkhoz, Dальний Восток, which is close to Ushtobe, the Korean language was as a native language subject in the school, and this in Almaty also the Star School, a private school, and they are Korean classes. And the Seoul standard is possible to study in the huge center of education in each capital of the Central Asian countries. And initially, after the diplomatic relations were established, and then Korean missionary churches came to Central Asia, and in each church was organized also a Korean language group. We still preserve our ceremonies on holidays. Everybody knows about this. Some differences. They're all photographed. The kid, the child, is just in standard clothes. Yeah. But now many parents they buy Korean clothes in Korea or in Kazakhstan. If you look at on the table, you can see that there are dollars. Because if you want to give in Uzbekistan, for example, $100, it will be, a big, paper, like a mountain of papers. Yeah, but wedding. Yeah. Now there are no weddings in Tamils, in houses. They are all in the restaurants. Koreans, South Koreans say to us, look, you don't know Korean language. You are not a Buddhist, or you are married with other people. Who are you? And we are now in 6th, 7th generation, and the young generation is also asking who we are. Even the scholars, they mix of the diaspora identity, ethnic identity, and national identity. But I try to explain that these three identities, they are not the same. Yeah, and I'll try to he belongs. And Kazakh nation was established in the Soviet, only in the Soviet period. Yeah, then in the anti-Japanese struggle and communist movement, the ideology was awakening the national Korea. When diasporic identities formed, then diaspora. I cannot say how many years we need to form this diasporic identity. Some people say this, diasporization process, immigrants, society, then diaspora, maybe after 100 years or 200 years, diaspora. And then no more diaspora. This immigrant, not yet diaspora, and not more diaspora. Is a process, because if the diaspora community is assimilated, then there is no more diaspora. But diaspora remains until it identifies itself in the antecedents, we and they, in which they are.
If they are religious, are Koryo Saram usually Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, or
a religion? Okay, and the Russian is a significant group of Korean that became Orthodox. And the Russian government gave the Russian citizenship plus, Orthodox confession. If you are parishioner, then you can get citizenship, and Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, you can get land free. Yeah, so many Koreans said, I'm Christian, I'm Orthodox. Yeah. But in fact, of course, the number of the true parishioners was smaller than the official statistic. And then in the Soviet period, Koreans, they became atheists much more faster than other minorities, because the Koreans want to show their loyalty to Soviet government. She said, we are atheists, no Buddhists, no Confucian, we are atheists. So we are communists, yeah? And then after the collapse of Soviet Union, there's ethnic renaissance, and ethnic renaissance includes also religion. So Kazakh became very fast Muslims, slaves. In Soviet time in Kazakhstan was only 30 mosques. Now they have 5,000. Yeah. But in fact, the people who attend the mosque, they don't believe in that. Yeah. In case of Koreans in Central Asia in post-Soviet time, the crucial role played Korean, South Korean missionary churches. They were very, very, aggressively, in post-Soviet space. And many former Soviet Korean Saram began to attend these churches. First of all, because there was a chance to gather together. Second, to learn Korean language. Third, the Korean pastors, ministers, they promised if you will be, good parishioners, so you can visit Korea. Yeah. But with the time, now we have people who, among the Korean Saram, who are believers, the real parishioners. And concerning other religion, we have in Almaty one Buddhist temple. The number of people who are attending is very small. And the most Korean missionary churches, they are across Pakistan. We don't have
I'm sure that's very disappointing for Don Baker, who studies in Korea.
So only Korean missionary, not any.
No. We have a lot of other missionaries. And any kind of missions and esoteric, groups in Scientologists and so on. So all people come to us. Yeah. But I mean Kazakhstan. But now the government took very strict measures against the missionaries. And in Uzbekistan or Tajikistan, other Central Asia, this is another situation because in Kazakhstan, Islam still has no strong influence like in Uzbekistan or Tajikistan. In Tajikistan, this missionary church was exploded. The bomb was 2 times. And the people were killed. And then in Uzbekistan, several times the Korean missionaries, they were expelled from the country.
Other questions?
So do you know about those Korean communities in China?
Northeastern
China.
Yeah, Dongbuk.
How did they found themselves there and then they moved to the Soviet Union, to Russia? And my grandmother was born in China. She's Korean. And then she was little and they were escaping to Russia, and then they ended up in Siberia, where she grew until she had my mother, and my mother was born in Siberia, and then they moved back to the Far East. But I was always wondering.
This triangle in the border area. The border between Russia and Korea is just 16 kilometers. Now in the map. And then in the Korean, they moved from Hamgyong, Pukto, and they crossed the Tumangan, they were then in the Russian territory. If Amokhan, then in China, in Manchuria, and they got Wando is a Russian territory, Kando is a Chinese territory. And some people, they went first to Manchuria, and then from Manchuria, they went to Russia.
But the border between the Russian Far East and China was not really closed definitively till 1930 something.
Yeah, 26. Yeah. And also, the people have a chance to move free back in from Manchuria to Russia or Korea.
So some Koreans.
But the number of those people who immigrated from Manchuria to Russia, we don't know. That's dark numbers. There's no statistics yet.
But we do know that quite a few of the Koryo Saram in the Russian Far East fled from Russian territory into China to avoid collectivization in the early 1930s. So there was the other direction. It sounds like your grandmother went from China into Russia, right?
Yeah.
And
but
then
there were many going the other way.
And then guerrillas, the partisans, they moved. When the Japanese troops They fight it against the Korean partisan go to the Russian Far East or Siberia. Then to escape, they moved to Manchuria. And the Koreans who were involved in the partisan movement, they were over 20,000 Koreans active in partisan movement.
I saw another hand up here.
Yeah, I was born on this island called Sakhalin in the far east of Russia. Can you touch a little bit briefly on the history of the Koreans that ended up on that island just north of Japan? So I know half the island used to, well, that's what we were told in school, half the island used to belong to the Japanese before the Second World War, and I think they occupied the territory for about 40 years, and they sent a bunch of prisoners, but I'm not too sure about how they all ended up there.
Yeah. Actually, our topic was Koryo Saram. Yeah, and there is another story about the Sakhalin Koreans and the island Koreans. Yeah, this story is different. Yeah, and what do you like to know exactly?
Well, I guess at what period of time they actually started migrating? So was it them? Was it the Manchurian Koreans from China that migrated there, or was it the Japanese soldiers that actually brought them over there?
Well, really great, because we don't want to spend too much time on this, but the Koreans on Sakhalin didn't get to Sakhalin until the Koryo Saram had already been deported to Central Asia. So after 1937, and they were mostly went there as laborers sent there by the Japanese imperials. And they came from the southern part of Korea. They had nothing to do with the northern part of Korea.
But do they
Over 1 million Koreans were sent. Some of Koreans they went to Sakhalin voluntarily because they wanted to earn money. So in rotation, 1 million Koreans were on Sakhalin, Karakuta, that's the south part of Sakhalin. Yeah? And then after the Second World War, mostly they left with Japanese, especially many married with Japanese. And 60,000 left in Sakhalin, and then in Soviet period, some of them they were suffered because this legal status was not fixed, and many Sakhalin Koreans were without citizenship, and then now the first generation of Sakhalin Korean they repatriated to South Korea because South Korean government supported this, and they said they are citizens of Korea, and then the Japanese government should compensate for this, and several thousand of Sakhalin Koreans first generation are in South Korea.
So they're Soviet Koreans, but they're not Koryo Saram.
But they identify
from the mainland, they call it.
Exactly.
They say we and they. So I have relatives there, but they're we and we are.
They make a clear distinction.
The relations there are not so good between Materikowy Koreans and Sakhalin Island Koreans.
So they're not Koreans, so they have mixed identities. Yeah, they're confused. Wow.
Where does Koryo mark come from? Because sometimes it sounds like North Korean. And I'm from South Korea, but I have many Chinese friends, and like their Korean is very similar to like actual Korean language, but Koryo 사람들 use like really unfamiliar like language, like 바베무리 or 김치 or like we never use like those.
Professor Kim knows better about this, but as a historian, I would tell that around 90% of Koryo Saram descendants, they are from Hamgyong or from Pyongyang. But a small number of Koreans, I don't know exactly, maybe 5-10%, they moved by sea from south provinces to Russian Far East, especially during this liberation movement. Then some of Koreans also from South Korea, South Korean province, they moved to Russian. And then some words from other dialects, they were incorporated in Koryo, yeah, a few, but nevertheless, in some the South Koreans when hear the Koryo, they say, "Oh, this Hamgyal," but this word is from Gyeongsang-ga, and plus Russian loans.
Well, it's predominantly North Hamgyal, but different varieties of North Hamgyal coming into contact, mixing, leveling, and then a sort of new dialect created.
It's very specific,
but predominantly North Hamgyal.
It's unique.
It is unique.
It is very unique.
And it's important. There are interesting things hiding there that we.
And I really like the word 바베무리. It sounds delicious.
You've been traveling all over the world, and I've been staying mostly here. But here in British Columbia, in Canada in general, we have a growing Koryo Saram community. I don't think we have a diasporic identity yet, but I'm curious: are there Koryo Saram communities in other parts of the world that you know of that have, I don't know, maybe like an active diasporic movement, like an emerging diasporic identity that they, and then what is their motherland in that case?
There are 7.3, something 5 million Koreans living abroad. Yeah.
No, I mean, like
Yeah. But Korean diaspora, I would say the notion Korean diaspora is true in case of Koryo Saram, in former Soviet Union space, yeah, and in Chosunjok, All other Korean communities abroad, they are immigrants.
Can you put the Zainichi Chosen?
I would Zainichi Chosen too. Still.
Other questions or comments?
It can be, of course, disputed, yeah, because they are like criteria, diaspora are not. Yeah.
Do you know, like the Koryo Saram who are immigrating in the far abroad? Do you know where they tend to go? Like I don't know, is there a statistic or do you know?
No, there is no statistic actually. There is no statistic. Yeah, there is no statistic.
How do these people relate in different countries? So in other words, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, how do they interact with each other?
More or less than in the Soviet time, because in the Soviet Union it was one country, one passport, one currency, and and now and then many couples, young couples, they married from different parts of Soviet Union because, for example, in Soviet period, many Central Asian young Koreans, they went to Siberia because in Siberia are very good universities. They met each other, they married. Now, no chance. Yeah, and so Koreans in Kazakhstan, they have no chance to meet. I mean, young Koreans. So that's why the rate of inter-ethnic marriage is so high. In Kazakhstan, we are 100,000, and 1/3 of them is living in Almaty. And 98% of Koreans in Kazakhstan are urban population. So, and then the Koreans marry now. If 20 years ago or 30 years ago, Korean men married Russian or Slavic or Caucasian women, and now as Korean girls are also married with Kazakh, and Korean men are married with Kazakh, because the culture, the ethnic culture, is not so important. This is standard culture. There's no big difference in food, in clothes, in rituals, in religion, and mentality, and style of living. And then the urban Kazakh and urban Korean, they are much closer to each other than urban Kazakh and rural Kazakh.
Rita.
So for the younger generation of Koryo, Saram, and Central Asia, do you find that they proudly identify themselves with that title, or do they almost want to be more integrated with Koreans from South Korea?
Oh yeah, good question. You know, the Koreans they are proud of own identity, Koryo Saram. Koreans never, compared to other ethnic minorities, have hidden his identity or ethnic origin.
You know, so Koreans never hide their
ethnic origin, because, for example, these Kurds, because they were repressed, they said they wrote in the passport that they are Azerbaijan. Or Jewish people, they're Russian. Yeah. Korean never. Yeah. And you know, I've been in Kiev, and there was an ethnic festival of Korean amateur culture. And then on the stage, we are all of mixed blood. They look like Russians. But when I asked these girls who you are, they all say, I'm Korean. I'm Korean. If the status, the image of Koreans would be low, then they will hide ethnically. But it's high. To be Korean is good. To be Korean is
in Central Asia.
In Central Asia, yeah, because the status is the images. Korean are smart. Korean are well educated. Korean work very hard, and the Koreans are very generous. Generous, yeah. If they make money, they make money. They share with money. I don't know how it's here. And you know, that is also the specific peculiarity of Koreans in whole. The Koreans are feeling good. Why the Koreans are Asian Jews? Why Koreans are Asian Jews compared to Chinese or Japanese? Because Koreans are feeling good in multi-ethnic environment, and they are like mediator, ethnic mediator between distanced other, minorities or dominant environment. So in Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, the relation between Russian and Kazakh is not good. Yeah, but between them is Korean. He has good relation to Kazakh and good relation to Russian. But in Japan, because they are mono-ethnic, they are feeling very depressed. Not in China, not in other countries.
Just one or two more questions. We have to clear out of here by. Are they going to kick us out or?
We have until 9.
Well, we can take at least 5 minutes if there are questions.
Maybe to you. Question to you.
Are you asking me a question? Or
No. I give back because I can't forget it.
Other questions for anybody?
I'm wondering actually how big is the population Uzbekistan, Koryo Saram, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, all over the Central Asia.
Okay, in Kazakhstan, it's quite close to real. We have 2 census of population in Kazakhstan. So according to the last 2009, we are 103,000. So the population number was increasing in Kazakhstan. But it is according official statistics. But in fact, I suppose as 125,000 because they are illegal from Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Yeah. In Uzbekistan, President Karimov of Uzbekistan told once in his speech that the Korean community in Uzbekistan is 260,000. And then all the people say, oh, we do 260,000. But it's wrong. It's very wrong. Because the Uzbekistan scholars, they have just calculated the growth rate of Koreans in the Soviet period, and then they extrapolated it plus. In fact, in Uzbekistan there was no census. There are maybe 100. So in Soviet period there were 180,000, but now maybe 140,000. You know, I was in Tashkent last year, actually every year, and I asked the Uzbekistan Koreans, who are you feeling over there? Every in Tashkent. In Tashkent are living 80,000 Koreans, yeah? And they said to me, every Korean family in Tashkent has at least one relative in South Korea.
Working there, I see,
yeah, working, studying, illegal trading and so on. And in Russia was increasing. Now the Russian population census of the 2 years ago, they say 146,000, but in fact they might be 175. In Kyrgyzstan, 25,000. In Ukraine was increased, might be around 25, 30,000. Then small numbers are in other post-Soviet countries. Altogether, in the post-Soviet space is around 500,000.
And in Vancouver, maybe 70?
70 people or 70 families?
600 in Vancouver.
Oh,
wow.
Oh.
Really?
Wow. Diaspora. One last question.
Not visible.
Who has a burning question? One last question. We don't know, it might be 15 more years before German Kim comes to Vancouver.
No, it's very easy.
If there are no more questions, we can break and you can have some more informal time if you like. But before we break, I want to thank German again for coming from Kazakhstan. But I also want to thank and give a big round of applause to Elena for organizing it. That concludes the formal part of the evening. Thank you all for coming. I think we can still sort of mill around for there is some time before we get kicked out of the building. But thanks again, and hope to see you at the next event.
Okay, thank you.